Everything we experience teaches us something about the world around us. But what happens when those lessons create fear? How does that impact us? Joining me today is Terri Kozlowski, who's going to share her story of transcending fear. Hi, Terri.
Hi, Lucy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good. So I want to start off with your story because, as you mentioned to me beforehand, it's quite a raw and personal story. So I'll just turn it over to you and I'll let you share your story.
Okay. Um, I am a Native American, and my mother was born inside the Arctic Circle in a little tribe called Fort Yukon, Alaska. And her tribe is the Tinglet tribe of the Athabascan Indians. She was raised there without running water or electricity until she was 16 years old. And then she was given up for adoption, her and her two sisters, into what she called the white man's world. She was put on an airplane. And her first night in Washington State, she played with the light switch, turning it on and off, and flushing the toilet, watching the water go down, because they had never seen anything like that before in all of their lives at the age of 16, 15, and 14. So she was ripped away from her identity. She was then not allowed to be Native. She had to be white. And her adoptive parents were loving, but at the same time, her stepfather was slightly abusive because he was trying to get them to be Christian. So she started drinking and she married my dad. And my sister and I were born 11 months apart to the day. And then my parents got a divorce, mainly because my mother was an alcoholic. And my dad got custody of the two of us young girls in the mid 70s. He was the first man to ever do so in the state of Maryland, because that's not something that happens very often, is that a dad gets custody of two little girls. He got custody, and then we stayed with him and my grandmother for several years. And we didn't see my mother except once or twice when she came to visit. So the summer when I was 11, she wanted us to come visit. She was now in New Mexico and we were in Pennsylvania. And my dad agreed. And we went out there for what was supposed to be an 8-week visit. It lasted less than 4. First 2 weeks were fabulous. She wasn't drinking. Third week, she started drinking. And by the end of that third week, I realized she was doing drugs as well. And she was having her little parties. And one night it got a little carried away. Everybody passed out. I went to bed and I woke up with a gag in my mouth and my hands tied, and 3 men raped me while my mother stood in the corner with her best friend watching so she could get money for drugs. So she sold my innocence. My sister is laying in the bed beside me. I find out later that she was drugged. So she slept for 3 days. I had presence enough to monitor her breathing and her pulse, make sure she had a heartbeat, everything was good, because I didn't know what to do. I'm 11. So my sister wakes up and is upset because my mom has been gone now for almost 4 days, disappeared. And I'm in that little efficiency apartment, making sure I'm eating, trying to give my sister to suck on a wash rag so that she was having fluids. And my mother shows up, hands me her paycheck, and asks me to go get it cashed and buy groceries, which I did. My sister and I went to the store. I'm 11, cashed the check, got a money order for her rent, because she was in an efficiency apartment, weekly rent, and brought back groceries, handed her the groceries, and my sister and I went to pay the rent across the alleyway. When we came back, my mother was standing in the doorway with our suitcases and said it was time for us to go home. Went back in the apartment door and locked it, and left us on the streets of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm 11, my sister's 10. So my sister's crying and very upset. And the last thing my dad said to me, which I think looking back was a saving grace for me, was to take care of my baby sister. Because when she started crying, That's what clicked in my head, take care of my baby sister. So I started doing those things that I would do to take care of my baby sister. I calmed her down. We figured out that we would go to a friend's house to make a phone call for me to call my dad. So call my dad. Next day, we're on an airplane back to Pennsylvania. I get off the airplane and walk up to my dad and say, we need counseling. So I was very present and aware that what happened to me wasn't my fault, that what happened to us was life-changing and we needed professional help. And 2 days later, I was in therapy for 5 years. Now, the therapy at the time because now we're in the mid 80s, early 80s, we're in the early 80s, was not up to par the way it is now. And what I mean by that is they didn't know what to do with me because number one, I wasn't telling them what had happened. Because what am I? I don't have the words to say what happened. I now do, but at 11, I didn't know. Bad things happened. People touched me. I didn't like it. There was blood. What do I say? So now, if there's even suspect, there's language, there's dolls, there's ways to communicate to small children and children who don't have the language and understanding. I didn't know what sex was at the age of 11. I think kids now do, but I didn't at the age of 11. So it was all very difficult to try to figure out how to communicate to people, but I knew I needed help. That part I did know. So when I was 18, and by the time I got the language, I told my dad, I told the therapist. So by the time I got the language, I was doing the right things, but still the help I needed was not necessarily something that was really available at the time. So I'm continuing on. At the age of 18, I'm in college, and I have somebody tell me that I like being a victim. And I was a little astounded, a little shocked, a little upset, a little angry. But I thought about it for a while, because when you are a victim and people around you know that you're a victim, they treat you differently. They walk on eggshells. They don't want to upset you, and they leave you alone. That's what I was getting out of playing the victim, was that I was being left alone by friends and family, or people I thought were friends and family. Anybody that seemed to want to connect with me, I had walls up. I didn't allow you to come in because I wanted to be left alone, because I didn't know how to relate to you. What are you going to do? If I can't trust my mother, how can I trust you? So at 18, I'm realizing this and I'm thinking, okay, now I understand. So at the age of 18, I had my first pivotal moment, which was making a conscious decision to, instead of being a victim, to become a survivor. And when you become a survivor, the main thing that happens is there's a shift in your perception, where everything up to that point, you can blame on what happened to you. You can blame on the trauma. My mother did this, and this is why I reacted. And this is, at this point, it has been 6 or 7 years since the actual trauma had occurred. So there was a pause in understanding. I've made decisions since then. At 18, I am making decisions that have nothing to do with my mother, have nothing to do with the trauma. So I can't blame decisions I'm making today on what happened when I was 11. Now, I can still react. I can still be triggered. I can still be upset. In college, I used to have people come up and tap me on the shoulder from behind, and I'd come around swinging, because you don't touch me.
That was a trigger for you.
That was a big trigger for me. So I had to learn to be able to communicate. Okay, holler, say my name first, and then tap me, because otherwise, all you do is I get horribly fearful with somebody coming up and touching me without me knowing who they are, what they're doing, whatever. It's a trigger. And I was open enough in college to let people know that to understand me, you had to hear part of my story. I didn't get into lots of details, but I would say I was traumatized at the age of 11. So I have some issues that I know I have issues. So be gentle with me when we communicate. Be gentle with, don't come up behind me and tap me on the shoulder. You won't like the response you get. So, but that was part of being a survivor, was knowing some of those triggers and then being able to communicate to those around me what they were so that they didn't trigger me and I didn't react in those negative ways that would cause disconnect between me and the other person.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. And, in some way it's interesting to see how at the age of 11, you were aware enough to be able to get the help you needed. And that seemed to have carried on throughout your story, is that somehow you've had this inner wisdom that's been guiding you through everything.
So I attribute that to the fact that I believe that all of us, when we are born, know that we're connected to spirit, know that we are here for a purpose, and we know who we authentically are. And what happens is during childhood, and you can really see that in children under the age of 6, they know what they like, they know what they don't like. You can watch them be very passionate about things. And as they get older, some of that fades. But part of that is because they go through what I call a domestication process. Just like a puppy learns what good behavior is
You
and
have
what
to
bad
fit
behavior.
in. You have
We
to
do the
fit
same thing with
into, and I go back to the point that you made, when your mother was adopted and she was being forced to be somebody else.
Mhm.
Even at, she was 16, and even at that age we have some idea of who we are,
Mhm.
but not necessarily to be able to articulate who we are or to clearly say, no, that's not who I am. So I can certainly understand how, you know, that being forced to be somebody that you're not. And in all reality, that's what a lot of things in life have done to us, isn't it?
Correct. Correct. We
And
go through a really bad domestication process. I think that the new generation of parents are seeing some of that and are trying to be a little bit more aware and deal with the children differently than what my parents did with me or what parents have done in the past. And through the domestication process, we forget who we are. And then we go through that midlife crisis where we're remembering who we are. And so we go through the period where we're domesticated by our parents. Then we get more domestication through peer pressure in high school and college. And then we go out into the world being this person that we're not quite sure exactly who we really are. And we spend the next 20 years trying to figure out who we really are. And when we have our midlife crisis, it's because this is who I am. All of that was not who I was. This is who I really am. And that, that is what we've seen as a pattern. And I'm hoping that future generations don't go down that same road.
I can 100% relate to that, because I came from a very British family. There's a way things are done, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
the way. And you're not even allowed to question. That's just the way it is. But that wasn't in my personality. Um, I don't like to be told what to do. I never have. I like to be able to know for myself. So as a child, and certainly through my teenage years, I was the bad one. I was the rebellious one. I was always that one. And I listened to what you're saying, and now I relate it back to, I was being forced to be somebody that I wasn't. But
Yes.
that inner wisdom was resisting and was pushing back, saying, no, that's not who you are. And it actually got to a point where I don't even think I knew I could ask who I was, because I just felt that because I wasn't who everyone else thought I should be, that I was in the wrong. There was something wrong with me. I was broken.
Correct. That's the problem with the domestication process, is that who we really are and that inner wisdom we know we have, because we know it's there. But when we try to voice that, we're told that it's wrong, which means that we're wrong, which means that we're bad. And that all goes into self-confidence, self-loathing, shame of ourselves, all those things that we then struggle as adults to deal with, so that we end up with poor self-confidence. We end up with not being who we really are and being shy. A lot of shyness comes out of being told that you can't do what you feel you should do. A lot of people think they're shy. It's not that they're shy, it's that they aren't allowed to be who they really are.
Yeah. And certainly for me, you said that, typically we hit that midlife crisis. I refer to it as, for me, it was scraping the bottom of shit barrel, where
Yeah.
I was so lost. I was so broken. I was so confused. And it was in that moment of desperation that I asked the universe for, just give me one thing. Give me one thing to help me pick myself up off the ground and move forward. Um, I asked and the universe answered for it. And I listened, more importantly. And that's what's led me down this journey now. And, part of what I'm doing, as you are with sharing your story, is I don't want other people to get to that point.
Correct.
If people like us are sharing our story and sharing our lessons, can help somebody else from reaching that point, or as you mentioned, parenting differently,
Mm-hmm.
so that we are allowing our children to become who they are. We have two adult children. They're 19 and 22. And in raising them, there were a lot of times where teachers would tell me, they're both very creative, and teachers would tell me, well, they keep drawing in their notebooks, or they're not paying attention, they're doing, and they look to me to discipline them. And I put it back on them, saying, you know they're living in their own land. That's where they want to be. That's not up to me to tell them that they're wrong. That's up to you to engage them in a way that they want to listen to what you're saying.
Correct. Because if they're doodling, she's not keeping their attention. And that's one of the things that, a lot of kids were diagnosed supposedly with ADHD because they weren't paying attention. Well, if they're not being engaged, then they're not going to pay attention. You have to engage, just like with adults. We all learn differently. We all comprehend things in a different way. And sometimes if you just give that creative child an assignment to look up some history and draw a scene, and man, will you come up with these intrinsic designs from these scenes, because they are now using the half of their brain that works better for them.
Yeah,
and they will learn the history. That's a way for them to learn the history and yet still be creative in the process.
yeah. I really like your concept. I've never heard of it put that way. The domestication.
Domestication.
Yeah.
We do it to dogs.
I know, but it just seems so awful when you look at it from that point of view, that we do it to ourselves.
We do. I mean, parents did it to us. We do it to our kids. We watch our adult children do it to our grandkids. And I noticed it more with my granddaughter, because my son says, "You are so different with her than you were with me." I said, "Yes, I know better."
I say that when you know better, you do better.
When you know better, you do better. So, we are born fearless. Okay. If you look at little children, they have no fear. They get up, they fall down, they keep getting up. And that's how they learn to walk. Because if they were afraid of falling down, they would never learn to walk. So children are unafraid. And we as adults instill fear into the children. We say, when they are jumping off of something, "Oh my gosh, be careful, that's too high." It's not too high. What you say is, pay attention to what you can handle. If you think that's good and you're going to be good, fine, go for it. Which is why my son said I was so different with my granddaughter, because I let her jump off of anything and I would never let him do anything like that. And so she's fearless. And when we went to the zoo and she held a tarantula on her lap. And then like 6 months later, she screamed because there was a tiny spider crossing the wall. And I said, "You held a tarantula. Why are you scared of the spider?" And she said that Nana is afraid of spiders. I said, "Well, you need to show Nana." And I got the spider down and I showed it to her. I said, "We're going to take it outside. FYI, you don't like mosquitoes, do you?" "No, spider eats mosquitoes." "Oh." So again, we are what instills fear into children. And as adults, we need to do better in allowing the children to explore the world in a way that is safe for them. And at the same time, we're not instilling fear. The world is full of enough terror that we don't need to start instilling that in our children.
Yeah, that's the truth. So how is it that you went from being that, that then 18-year-old that's starting to identify what you need and how best to interact with you? Because you now help people. You help people heal now. So how did that transition occur?
I had gone through, from the time I was 18 till I was about 38, where I was living a contented life, but at the same time, I'd had these tapes playing in my head. One of the tapes was my mother telling me that I was not a survivor. One of the tapes played in my head was that because my mother didn't protect me, I was unlovable. I was not worthy to be loved by others if my mother didn't protect me. So these are the tapes that played in my head. And at about 38, 40, I had this aha moment where I realized that, you know what, my mom she and I haven't spoken in several years. Why am I allowing her voice in my head of something that she told me when I was 11 interrupt my life now, when I am successful in business, I am successful in raising children. I could say that I was a successful human being. But why was I allowing these tapes to keep affecting me and my life? And I realized I was causing my own suffering. And that's a very Buddhist, I think Buddha actually said that our thoughts cause our own suffering. And we're the ones that play those tapes in our heads. Nobody is in my head talking to me but me. And the ego is meant to protect us. That's its job. And the problem it has is the ego cannot tell the difference between you having bruised feelings because somebody made a negative comment to you that hurt your feelings, or a tiger chasing you. Okay. The ego cannot tell the difference. All it knows is you feel bad or you are scared and that you need protecting. So the ego then does whatever it can to protect you from things like getting your feelings hurt. So it uses those tapes as evidence that you need to still, 20, 40 years later, still be cautious of people and things and life. And a really good example is the 3 men that raped me were Hispanic men. So, and I lived in rural Pennsylvania where there was no Hispanic men. So when I saw Hispanic men, I'd have angst. I'd get scared because that's who raped me. When I started working with Hispanic men, I realized, and I've worked with them for over 15 years, I realized I have more positive experiences with Hispanic men than I have negative. Why is that one negative outshining all the positive? And that's a lot to do with how the ego uses incomplete information. Oh, there's a Hispanic man, you need to be careful, he's going to rape you. Well, that's not the case. Yes, there's a Hispanic man. I've had more positive experiences than negative experiences. So ego, thank you for alerting me. I'm dismissing this. And we can do that. And as soon as you dismiss it, the fear goes away. The fear melts because the ego can't maintain something when you start using logic with it.
I can't help but think of the saying, you're your own worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like what those tapes, that inner critic, the itty bitty shitty committee, whatever you want to call it, that's your own worst enemy. You're doing it to yourself. Yes, you are. Whether
Correct.
you're consciously or unconsciously doing it, you are doing it to yourself. And we ultimately, we all have a choice of what we
Correct.
say, how we react, what we think, how we feel. It's our choice. And once we realize that it's a choice, that's when the shift happens.
And that's the hardest part for people who have suffered trauma, is the becoming aware that they have a choice, that they don't have to be in despair, that they don't have to be depressed or be anxious. Because fear in the past, if you're fearful about the past, that's called depression. If you're fearful about the future, that's called anxiety. The only place that you're going to have peace, and the only place ever that peace occurs, is in the present moment. So staying present and not living in the past and not living in the future allows you to maintain that peace within you. It lets you be aware of this particular moment in time, because in this moment in time, there's very little wrong with most of our lives if they are in the present moment.
That, yeah, what you said about defining depression as living in the past and anxiety is in the future. I do it. I think everybody does it at some point in their day or in their life. Is it, you can't help but go down that rabbit hole of thought. And it's realizing when you're doing it and snapping yourself back to, no, this is where I am right now. You don't know if that's going to happen, and you can't change what has happened. You can just choose how you are in this moment.
I had panic attacks when I was 18 and 19 years old. And part of that was allowing my mind just to go on and on and on down these horrible rabbit holes of things that could happen. If I did this, then this could happen, then this could happen. And the reality is, if one of those paths requires somebody else to react to you, the likelihood is it's not going to happen. And you can end that rabbit hole excursion by realizing that, how you react is one thing, and you have a choice in how you react. You have a choice on whether you're going to stay living in the past and be depressed. You have that choice. You have the choice to always be worried about the future and be anxious all the time. But if you got into the present moment and realized, right now I'm at peace, right now everything is okay, and allow the mind to rest. That's the second big thing I did, was I got quiet. And at first the chatter of the ego was very loud, but as you get quiet, and I spent years trying to learn how to meditate, and it was very, very difficult. And the only reason I learned to meditate was because I went to yoga. And after going to yoga for over 6 months, 3 times a week, Shavasana is the last pose, which is everybody's laying on their back, dead man's pose, and you're breathing. And lots of people fall asleep in Shavasana. I'm not one to take naps, so that never happened to me. But I realized during that period of time, there wasn't anything in my head. I didn't have that egoic voice chattering in the background. I was still. And when I realized that that's what meditation was getting in that quiet space and being, and that's what human beings are supposed to do, is be, not do. And when I got into that place, the amount of peace that flows in, and the connection again with spirit, when you reach out to the universe and you know that that peace is being channeled through you from a universal source, and that you're connected to it, you're connected to everyone else. And if we all responded with love in all our interactions, the world will find peace. The world will be a better place. And we can all do that. We can all make the decision today, I'm only going to respond with love in all my interactions. And that's how we change the world.
And I think there's also, going off your point about meditation and stillness, I think there's a lot of myth and misconceptions around meditation. And I think that's why people think that they can't do it or they don't
Mm-hmm.
have time to do it. Um, I have a busy brain. I have a hard time. It's not that I have an inner critic that's always going, but I always have ideas and thoughts and stuff going off. So to quiet and center myself, I actually do my meditation each day just after my yoga, which I do just after my journaling. So I go through this entire process just
Yep.
to be able to quiet my mind and do my meditation. I actually do a chant meditation because, again, repeating the phrase,
Mm-hmm.
helps me calm the mind. And I even have to count, like I use beads
Mm-hmm.
to move through my hands just so that I can keep myself. And it's a muscle you have to practice.
Correct.
and
Correct.
and it takes time, but you have to keep at it. And it's like any practice. Everybody wants success and they want it now, but it doesn't happen that way. It's part of the beauty is the journey that you go through in itself. So
And that's what life is about. The life isn't about the destination, it's about the journey.
it's the journey. It's the journey. And even though it's a roller coaster, it's a journey. You have a book coming out.
I do. It's called Raven Transcending Fear. It's my memoir, and it talks about my story and it talks about the recovery process. And there were 6 major things that steps that I went through to get to the place where I am now, which is I am completely content with my life. I know that what my purpose is. I know I'm supposed to help people overcome their fears and limiting beliefs, and that my journey is to continue along that path to help others.
Beautiful. And where can people find your book?
It'll be on Amazon,
Amazon? Okay.
and it comes out in March, or you can go to raventranscendingfear.com.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to put the links to your website and everything in the show notes so people can easily find you. You also have a podcast, so I'll make sure that there's a link to that as well.
Yes, Self Solutions Podcast is my podcast. I started it last year. And again, it's about overcoming fear and limiting beliefs, and we touch on different topics. It's about a 15-minute podcast where we dive deep into one particular area that week.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and to share a very personal story with us.
It was my pleasure, Lucy. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.